you can't take politics out of politics. People try it all the time. People keep thinking that our political system would be really great if people just somehow stop to think about how they get elected and stop to think about their next career move.
You're saying?
People like to think that you can take the politics out of politics. If you do that, and there are some states which have set up nonpartisan methods of creating districts, you create new problems. Now, the new problems may not be as big as the problems we have today, but you shouldn't think that there's some magical solution to redistricting. For example, some states say that they turn over the entire process to a nonpartisan commission, a commission that's deliberately chosen to be nonpartisan, which is to pay no attention whatever to any political consideration. And if you do that, say a body you have the size of the Michigan House with 110 members, on the average 30 of the members or 40 of the members will be in districts with more than one incumbent. And so suddenly, 20 or 30 or 40% of the legislature will find itself facing a primary. And they'll spend the next 2 years acting very squirrely as they engage in political fistfights to try to retain their seat. Well, that's not, most people think that's a bad thing. But the only way to avoid creating lots of primaries is to pay attention to where incumbents live. But that's a political consideration, isn't it? In other cases, there's a mathematical method which can be applied by a very simple computer program, which involves dividing the state along the shortest possible line, which would divide the state into two groups, one of 55 seats and one of 55 seats. So it divides, you divide the whole state into two territories. Then you take each of those territories and you divide it 27, 28. And so you just keep dividing the state until you get down to individual pieces of territory, each of which has 1/110th of the state's population. That sounds like it's completely mechanical. There's a single unique solution, and there's no bias to it. Unfortunately, it means that every city will have the strangest boundaries drawn through it. I mean, there will be two houses that are next to each other, and one of them is in one congressional district and one's in the next. That your state legislator represents only the stores on the east side of the shopping center and the center of the shopping center and on or somewhere else. In the old days on the MSU campus, we used to have a boundary line which ran right through 6 dormitories, and so there were 2 different county commission districts there, and one county commission district represented rooms 3, 17, 18, 19, 20, and 21, and the other county commission district represented rooms 301 to 314 and 322 to 340. Well, maybe that makes sense, but it doesn't make any sense to me. So my point is that these methods of mechanically drawing or automatically drawing or drawing without politics, direct politics, they have their own problems. And there's no perfect solution to this. The system we have is a political system. The system we have says that whoever controls the legislature during the process of the U.S. Census gets to draw the lines that come out of it, and if control is split, that there has to be a compromise. Well, that's I don't know. Is it better or worse than the other options? I don't know. Anyway, this is a political process in Michigan, and at this point, the Republicans control absolutely everything, and so they're going to draw lines that they like, and so they'll screw us the best they can.
What's your experience redistricting? You worked on it for what, 2 or 3 times now?
Oh, I think more than that. 1980, I was involved pretty deeply. I drew the lines that were, well, I drew many of the lines in the county commission apportionment here in Ingham and was around the legislative apportionment process. Similarly in 1990 and in 2000. And so this is my 4th go-around, I guess. So I'd say you can't really say 40 years because there are only 30 years separating those 4, but I've been involved in the process through 4 decennial censuses, which is certainly as much as anybody. Well, let me take it completely differently. We don't know where the districts will be drawn, and certainly the Republicans will do their best to screw us. But there's a very interesting feature of apportionment, of districting, that people overlook, and that is when it's drawn, it's sort of like a new car. I would say that districting is about like a car. When it's brand new and shiny, it looks really nice, and it's a brand new one. And after 2 years or 4 years, it's still pretty nice and it still runs pretty well. And after a car gets about 10 years old, it starts showing a little rust. And, you know, transmission makes little strange sounds, and the upholstery isn't nearly as nice. And really, it's, you know, people get rid of their cars. Districtings start looking pretty tacky about 7 years out. And all the districts which have been carefully drawn to elect a Republican or elect a Democrat or whatever, they cease to be correctly calibrated as time goes on, both because of population shifts and also because of political changes within communities. And so there are districts which the Republicans drew 10 years ago, thinking that they would be Republican districts forever, like the one that Gary Peters now represents, that they simply miscalculated. You know, they drew districts that were too close, and that were shifting over time. There's also, so one thing that happens is that no matter how tricky a districting is, a set of plans is, when it's first drawn, it gets to be much less clever and much less effective with each succeeding election. So at about the 10th year, everybody was happy to scrap it because it no longer works for the purpose it was drawn for. There's a second aspect of districting, which is that whoever's in control of it has this very difficult choice they have to make, and there's no solution to this choice. You can try to get the largest number of districts. So in this case, the Republicans can draw the largest number of Republican districts, or you can try to draw districts which are safe for your party, and you don't have to worry about controlling the legislative body. But you can't really maximize both of those things. The more you try to stretch and create additional Republican districts, the more you have to water down the majorities in the districts you draw, because you're starting with a pool of Democratic and Republican votes, and all the votes are going to get counted in some district. And no matter how clever you are, if you, with 110 legislative districts, for example, if you tried to create 60 pretty safe Republican districts, you'd have trouble, and you'd have to make some sort of risky moves to do that. If you try to draw 65, you can be sure that you are going to make some mistakes. There's a famous case, this is from 30 years ago. The Indiana Republican Party controlled the process, drew 10 districts, of which 9 were Republican on paper, and by the end of the decade they controlled 1 district out of 10 in Indiana. They lost all the other 9, just through a series of unlucky events for themselves. And I probably have that slightly wrong, but it was one of the most remarkable sets of reversals in reapportionment history to watch this excessively ambitious plan. I mean, if you were to be sensible, if you were the Republicans in Indiana, you wouldn't aim for 9 out of 10 districts, you would aim for 7. But they aimed for 9, and they ended up with, as I said, I think 1, briefly, and then they took some back after that. So you have this tension between safe districts and a lot of districts. And you have individual members and people who would like to run for the office at your elbow, nudging you and bringing in interest groups and trying to convince whoever's actually in control of the process to draw a district for Bill over there. Oh, well, you need to include his home precinct. Well, couldn't you include the northern part of the subdivision too? Couldn't you do this? So you have all these individual actors who are getting in the way of the process. The person starts out, whoever's in control of redistricting, and thinks that you have a complete blank slate. You have all these populations, you have all these precinct results, so you know where the Democrats live, you know the Republicans live, and you start off with this nice, simple problem of how can we draw 110 legislative districts, how can we draw 38 Senate districts, how can we draw 14 congressional districts to have the greatest number of Republican seats. And as soon as you pick up the pen, somebody comes into the room and whispers, no, not there, no. Put that line on the north side of the river. Let's put Ward 1 in this district. And no matter what little step you take to accommodate somebody, there's somebody who wants something else. And pretty soon you discover, even if one party controls the whole process, it's not a simple problem of maximizing that party's advantage, because there are all sorts of interests which bring themselves into play, which attempt to lean on the person drawing the lines. And at this point, of course, the Democrats are free from that problem because we have no input whatever into the process, except possibly that somebody can invent a reason to sue. So I guess the Democratic response to this reapportionment will be to keep proposing plans which the Republicans pay no attention to whatever, and then when eventually the Republicans produce a plan, to look at it intently to see if there isn't some defect in it which is fatal and will force it to be redrawn, which there probably won't be, but maybe somebody will find a couple of little nitpicky things that are mistakes, populations totaled wrong, or districts which don't actually join up, a district that's in two pieces which are separated by a small piece of land that nobody noticed, that sort of thing. So the Democrats will look for that kind of a nitpicky thing, and then eventually they'll try to come up with a theory that gets them into federal court, because at this point we don't want to be in state courts because the Republicans control the Michigan Supreme Court so completely that they'll just, whatever it is, that whatever objection we brought, even if it was completely valid, we wouldn't have a chance of. The question is whether we have any chance in the federal court, and the answer is probably not. The Republicans are probably doing a pretty good job of drawing it so that they will keep themselves out of federal court.
Anything else to add to that?
No, I think I've talked too long.
Okay.
Yes, I believe that the same genius who brought us reform Michigan government now, and who was not involved in any way in the faux Tea Party, I believe that Mark will be the mastermind behind the Democratic response to the Republican districting. And the only thing I can say that is good about it is that because nothing we do will have any effect, it might just as well be Mark running it.
Okay.
And you know that in England, at least supposedly, no longer true, but the rule of thumb for libel was the greater the truth, the greater the libel.
Doesn't matter if it was true or not.
It was worse. No.
It was worse if it was
It was
true.
worse if it was true.
Oh, okay.
Because if it was false, you could disprove it. But if it was true, it was much worse. And since libel was largely used by people who were titled, basically to afflict people who were not titled, and so somebody would start spreading a rumor about Lord so-and-so's drinking problems, and if Lord so-and-so didn't really have a drinking problem, it wasn't a big deal. But if he did have a drinking problem, just think about how much problem you've caused him, right?
I can pick up on that.
Anyway, it's no longer British law, but it's always been a great contrast to American libel law.
Casey?